Mike Merker here, and we are doing the People Solving Impossible Puzzles or whatever podcast. And today's not about me. We are talking to Ryan Elcock. Ryan, have I ever met you before?
But no, you have not. No, you have not. This is the first time we have ever met, probably. Although I did see that you went to U of T. I took some courses there around that time, around between 2004 to 2006. But I'm a proud Western Mustang. I am, that's what I am, purple and proud all day, every day. I also went to TCU to do my MBA, so I'm a happy, proud U of T dropout. Well, because I got into business school there in the States. And once again, we were purple and proud all day, every day. Got to give shout out to my Horn Frogs as well as to my Mustang. So
Amazing, amazing, and tell me all about who are you? Spill what you can say or not say whatever you want, and you can ask me. It's no holds bar. This is uncut, raw, unless it needs to be cut. We'll see.
yeah, of course.
We
So
can't
let's
for
just be,
emergency. Tell
let's
your
just be
spiel.
honest. Of course. So yeah, so my name is Ryan Elcock. Born in Toronto, but I grew up in Barbados for a little while, raised by my grandmother. May she rest in peace. So I was raised by her. Came back, did all my schooling back in Toronto. Went to De La Salle and then Michael Power. Then, like I said, went to Western. Did psychology and also did math. And afterwards, worked for a little while. Then even my greatest job, apparently, like most people, when they talk about what was your greatest job or a job experience, it would be something like in corporate. My greatest job experience that I ever had was working as a janitor at Holland Christian Homes. And it would seem odd, right? Because it's the janitor during security. But the reason why it was one of the greatest jobs I ever had, looking back on it, is because when you're there and you have the lives of 800 people in your care, because they're mostly the elderly and whatnot that still have independent living. And you're the one guy that's in charge of the security and everything, just doing all the work, cleaning and making sure everything's done right. You have to have a certain level of control, and you got to be even keeled. You got to be balanced. You got to plan ahead, even when you're doing your job, because then there could be an emergency that pulls you away and everything. So it taught me how to handle stressful situations, and you don't see it because it's just like, oh, we mostly talk about the great jobs that, from those working at a big company. But the best example I would say is, in the story with David and Goliath, right? They talk about David, and they look, wow, mighty warrior who slew Goliath. Yeah. But they don't talk about the story of how he was a shepherd, and that shepherd is and how he had to wrangle that, fight the lion, fight the bear. Those are what trained him to deal with Goliath, and then also helped him as a great military commander to move his people and everything else, right? Move his the troops, and then you see how he had the dynamics with the 3, the 10, the 30, etc., right? So it's just that same way that janitorial. And the reason why that was important to me is because I still remember when I took the job. Because you see, I graduated when I left Western. It was around 2001, 2002. So this is a
Yeah.
time when, some planes decided to crash into a building. And then there we are, economic, it created a whole economic fallout. So, everybody's looking for a job. Doesn't matter where you graduate from. And it was at that time, I remember the teacher asked me, not the teacher, sorry, the interviewer that for the same job, who was the housing manager, she goes, you have a lot of education. Why are you taking this job? And I said to her, you know what? I'm taking this job because you never know what could come from it. Because I told her, because, they're a Dutch Reformed church, Christian homes, Holland Christian Homes, Dutch Reform and everything. But so I just said, you remember the story of Joseph when he went in as a slave, but he came out as a governor, right? So it was just the whole concept of you go in, but what you take from it, it helps you move to places. Because I said, you got to remember the janitor, he has all the keys from the CEO right all the way down to he's cleaning the floors all the way to the CEO. So he has access. If he understands, then he has ears. And then you see everything. So if you have a plan and a mission, and so when I ran, I used to walk around. It was funny because even the residents, one of the guys, they go, "Oh, there goes the box," and I'd be walking around just like that, right? It's not like I'm doing this job, but I'm taking so much from it because I'm learning, just seeing things that most people don't see, because most people might not pay attention, but then you start to learn even power dynamics, like because I was trying to be efficient, but because I was efficient, I would always still maintain a level of communication with the person who was the receptionist, so she knew she could always reach me. So I could be doing something. So if I needed some downtime because I was done, I could just relax, so I could focus. When an emergency comes, I'm not frazzled. And she knew she could reach me. So if I had to go get something, I'm going across the street, get a pizza, go and come back, and I'm still listening, right? And so she knew that. So it was like in those situations, just by being present, it taught me how to be present but still be mobile at the same time, present yet invisible when I needed to be, right? So it was one of the greatest jobs. And I found even in certain situations, and even like even recently, I always my mom, because she's older now, and she had broken her tibia and the fibula, and it ain't easy trying to tell, even just to walk a street that you would walk like that, right? But for her, it was not. And I'm dealing with where I live. I live in Brampton now, and you got all these cars coming, and you got to even keep cars in control, even during a red light where they got the green. We're on the red, but only because she's still walking, and I'm able to control the traffic and say, "Wait, move," and I'm just doing it instinctively, knowing that this is a situation that is not ideal, because of course I could walk fast, but they all see her walking, and because I'm there, where they might have tried to speed up, they're slowing down. It's that authority to say, "Look, you move," and I'm directing traffic while walking with her at the same time. And she was like, "Man, you would have been a great cop," or because she was like watching. She'd never seen me like do that, but because of the situation, I said we're walking home, and it's not like it was far, but it was still far enough for her because of the situation. But the fact that I'm controlling the traffic, she see me in a situation that is both dangerous, but yet requires, and the traffic and all of the traffic stop and patient. And that was the thing that I learned from being in that job. And it also taught me grace, because even when I was in business school, because I used to do that job, that's empathy. So whenever I see like the cleaning ladies and whatnot that were coming in, make sure I say hello to the abuelas and everything. And then they ended up bringing me food and snacks and everything else. And it came in handy because that relationship, one time I was studying late, get locked out. I accidentally got locked out of the business school, had to make a beeline or run to the maintenance office. I knew where to run to. And I was like, "Hey, look, I'm a student. I'm studying up there, but I kind of got locked out of the room. Can you let me back in?" And they did it no problem because of the relationship. But that comes from having a job like that, understanding even from the lowly position of janitor, but understanding how important it is still, and then bringing it back in how you deal with people. And throughout life and some of the places that I've been able to meet, if you saw my digital card, you see I've been in the presence, and it's the same way. You just know how to deal, but it's understanding that sometimes if the key is access, sometimes you got to know how to master from the lowliest of positions and be able to see things that most people don't see, but then be able to maneuver. And that's just basically the journey of the game. Sometimes we're focused on the destination, but that journey is just as important, right?
Yeah. No, I'm taking this in. I'm taking this in. Yes, interesting. Interesting. You are not hiding behind false honor. You are just saying, "I did this. I needed to work this job. This is how it is. This is how it was. My mom is sick." You're not, you're just saying the way it is.
Yeah,
Truthfully, honestly.
yeah. And
Yeah,
that's it. But
that's
it's
it.
just like using one helps with the other. Using one then allows you to see people as they are, right? Because some people, you see people when they don't think that you're watching them and everything else. The mask falls off, and then you engage, and then sometimes you learn the power of being from, from a certain situation, how to engage with people, and you see them in their humanness. And sometimes, no matter who's in power, they always want to see you in that. And I think that part I also got from my own mother, because when she first came to Canada, she actually worked as a nanny for Megan Follows from Anne of Green Gables. You know the story of.
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
And
so
a
she
Green
took
Gables.
care of that family when she first came here, and it was there when she came as the nanny. She would tell me stories sometimes of how she taught them, got them to eat when the parents couldn't and stuff, and then even the parents would wake up at certain times, because, and then it was like, oh, okay. So then you learn, sometimes the person who controls the kitchen is the one who can dictate when everybody in the house wakes up. So it was like those things. And so even when my mom was also, she took a job at her church, right? I remember when I was like, "No, mom, yo, take it. If they're paying you and they're paying you good, run with it." And she did better than when she had her regular job. She stayed there until she retired. And it was like, you learn a lot and you see a lot. But that's why I always say it's one of the greatest jobs I ever had, because it taught me from a seeming lowly, but it still paid the bills and everything else, and it helped position me to maneuver in a society, whether it be in the upper echelons or whatnot, how to engage with people in a way that you could talk to both people. And it came in handy when I went back to school. As I said, when I went back, decided to go back to school, and I went to U of T from 2004 till 2006. Then when I was in business school, that's where it came in really handy, because you know how to just be laid back with people that are highfalutin and feeling all important, going and and you could joke about that, and they see that, right? Because everybody's always like, "Oh, sir, we prostrate ourselves before you. Oh, look at you, look at you. Yes, sir, you're so great, Billy." The fake laugh, and you're like, and you joke with them, but you can still talk, especially in Texas. That's the one thing that I liked about being when I was at Fort Worth, is like you go to school with some kids who are very wealthy, and yet they're still humble about it. Like, they know they're wealthy, but they're still low key. You could be going to a taco shop and you'd be talking to a CEO, and he's eating with you in the same Mexican taco shop eating. And you're talking about football, united with the love of college football and everything, just the same way. And that is something that really stands out, because like, even when I came back here, sometimes you see people all about, "Oh, look at me," but it's like, nah, man, I see you. And sometimes that's where just being able to maneuver, even from that experience, being able to see people as they are and who they are despite the weight. You could advise people, but once they see you, that you saw beyond, that's where they want to deal with you. That's where they want to trust you. And it all goes back to how I engaged, because of what I learned as a janitor at Holland Christian Homes back in the day.
You are not afraid to say a situation in your life, a work you did, which would not be your highest paying job or your most
No, no,
honorable job.
but
Why? But then you're revealing you're so much and
it
vulnerable.
because it sometimes, like I said, it goes back to,
Mm,
you remember the story of David, when and he's
yeah.
going to take on a Goliath, and brother goes, "Oh, you got the little few sheep. Why ain't taking care of them?" Right? Because sometimes people think of they would have probably thought, "Hey, but your brother's in the army. He's the big man." But this is the guy who goes in and is bold enough. Why? Because in the midst of dealing with his sheep, he has to protect the sheep. He's taking on a lion and a bear, right? Who does that?
You are coming from the study of you are religion. You are a
Yeah,
faith.
yeah. I
You're into
studied.
the
It's a funny thing. Like, I always joke, when I was in grade three, teacher kicked me to the back of the class because I didn't want to do my math homework, and so I started reading like Greek mythology and stuff. And then being brought up my grandparents, especially in Barbados, my grandfather was a close brother, so you had to learn the Bible and stuff. And so you start and so I became a world religions, like, overall. I became like just just absorbing that. And it became fascinating. And the reason why, like, I didn't understand it at the time. Give me 1 second
take your
here.
time. Take your time.
Yeah, yeah. I just got to tell someone who's calling me that I'm on a call.
No, no.
Yeah. So I
Take
just
your
got to
time.
text them back and say,
It's okay.
yeah, so just here. So, yeah. So, one of the things that is very, powerful about that is the fact that it helped me. And a lot of people think, why, because, growing up, even when you're in high school and whatever, people say, you got to go to school to study this and study that because it'll help you get a job. Come on, guys. But I always took an approach of I didn't understand it then, but I just kept taking a light courses that help with religion and stuff like that, and faith and mythology and all that. And I didn't understand why at the time. But as I got older, you start to realize, especially when you're in the States, oh yeah, like in the South, oh yeah, you got to be able to have, even if you don't agree with the politics all the time, just having that understanding, you can see people where they're at, and then you could talk, so it allows you to maneuver with, even topics that might, just to be able to engage with people. Because sometimes people think that they don't see you coming, right? They're not expecting you to see that. If I'm talking, like I'm in Brampton, and some people, of course, there's a lot of South Asians here. But because growing up, when my mom saw that was it, she didn't, discourage it. She was like, okay. I would go, when I was younger, I'd go downtown to Toronto, because I used to live in Toronto before I moved to Brampton, and talk to people. She'd take me to a place where there was like a Sikh shop that they sell incense candles, and we would talk about religion, right? So it was like that I went, it helped, because then when I came back to Brampton, and a predominantly South Asian community, I could move and then talk about things. And so they were pleasantly surprised, right? Because they didn't know that, when you go, oh, I read the Ramayana, and they're like, what? You read that? And they're like, yeah. So then, you're talking about certain books. Like there's one called I think it's called the Artha Sastra, which is like, it's written by a man. He's called Shanakiniti, right? But he's also, or Kautilya. Now, he is almost like the equivalent of Machiavelli and Adam Smith 2,000 years before they existed. He was a man ahead of his time, a brilliant economist, strategist, and he was of the Brahmin caste. So once you do that, that allows you to engage on a level, especially when you're doing business with South Asian community here. Now you can talk at their level. And because they don't see you coming, that's where then they kind of open up the doors a little bit more to breed trust and engagement. They want to engage with you better because you're talking in a way to them that they're like, yo, he gets it. It's not just like, oh yeah, I had butter chicken tikka and some paneer, and wow, that was great. You can talk, you have an understanding where you can engage. I started getting into Chinese, like Sun Tzu. I first started reading about Sun Tzu. I took Chinese philosophy when I was at U of T, and reading Confucius and stuff. But I was always into like mythology because I used to do martial arts. But what was crazy, then once you get into Sun Tzu,
yes,
you start reading Sun Tzu, but then you read Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, and the I Ching, and then you're like, wow, all right. So you start reading about all these things, and so that even from a geopolitical perspective now with the situation, it makes it a whole lot easier to navigate. And once again, it also goes back to sometimes, with the current geopolitical situation that we're in, it makes it easier to have an understanding from two sides, even in certain topics that are very, that are very touchy. You can talk from a balance and say, hey, look, so that both sides, you could get them to understand and see things from two's perspective, which then create real dialogue. And, it was one of the greatest things because, I'm a brother, it's quite obvious, a black man from the Caribbean. We have our history and we have our trauma, but then it allows you can put yourself into a perspective of what have other people gone through, and then have a more engaging relationship, because sometimes when you're so focused on the trauma that you've endured, you don't think anybody else has gone through trauma, right? And that also is very key, because then once again, in business relationships, if you understand those little sensitivities, that's where people then engage. And then even when you're doing business, you find out, what do you want? What do you need? And where are you coming from, so that you can bring it to an even level, so that both sides realize that there's no scarcity at the table of prosperity. We can both eat. And it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game where I win, you lose. So in terms of relationships overall, whether it be in business or personal, it makes a big difference. And I remember, Even on my way home from Brampton, when I work in Mississauga, I have a friend of mine. He was actually studying, I think it was rabbinical studies too, and we would just sometimes just talk like how you and I are talking about just everything under the sun from from our communities and having that honest engagement. And sometimes it's that honest engagement that leads to better relationships, especially from a business perspective, because as I say, you're a Jewish brother yourself.
Yeah.
One of the key things is sometimes even the perception of Jews, it's either, oh, they're here, or, they're just rolling in the dough like Scrooge McDuck, drinking in the money. And it's like, do you understand the nuances, right? But you know what I'm saying, right? Everybody saying, oh yeah, and but kind of like the perception of, like the Scrooge McDuck money jump, like when you get older, you realize, you ever try to, pennies are hard. And if you were to even try to jump, you'd break your hand and end up bloody. You wouldn't be spitting out coins, you'd be spitting out teeth. Now, why is that important, right?
This is so deep. No, go on. I'm just
What is so important about that is the fact that a lot of people don't understand the nuances that I had to learn subtly, like what's the difference between even if you're in Jews, but the Ashkenazim and the Sephardic and the Mizrahi and all those things, and what are the cultural differences that you need to pay attention to so that when you're engaging with them, because on the surface, you might say, but you don't understand those little nuances. But those little nuances can make a big difference, especially if you're an outsider engaging. And it's those subtle things, those subtle sensitivity that you show you can just talk to. Now, are you going to catch everything? No, because you're not there. But
wait a second. How do you know all? Wait a second. You studied all the different cultural nuances. What's the difference between? Wait a second.
I haven't got. Like I said, I'm not. But
Go and give what you know from your perspective.
No, well, it's just even like understanding the Sephardic Jews, especially a lot of them. They came like Spain and whatnot. Like from a geographical. When you say Mizrahi, Mizrahi, like when they talk about the Bible, right? From Egypt and stuff. So you're like, so you're here. And it's just those little subtle nuances that then understand even the dynamics, even about how they might get along with one another. Even
there's
understanding.
There's a lot of
like even with the one from Ethiopia.
I'm just saying. I'm just reflecting on everything you're saying. It's profound. Is that if you don't know, then you make fall into the assumptions. Because you don't know.
And then you don't realize there are struggles even amongst themselves. And yes, and so therefore you also realize that sometimes all those things, then you start to, if you don't understand, because everyone looks alike. It's kind of like when people go, oh, look at that brother over there. They all look alike. Why can't they all get together and work together? Hello, one, Africa's a big continent, and two, everybody ain't going to get along when you're a big continent. People from different tribes and whatnot lumped together based on borders that were not really there in the first place, right? And then nobody bothered to ask what are the dynamics, right? So it's the same understanding even when dealing with people, no matter who you're dealing with, because from our outside we might think, oh, everybody's working together, but there might be certain things that we don't see that are more hierarchical. And sometimes understanding those hierarchical differences, to us, it might look like, everything's great. But if you were to go inside and you might be like, oh man, it ain't all roses. And that would be kind of stressful. And therefore, you don't understand why sometimes even how people interact or talk, if they may be more direct, one other culture might take it as rude. One might see it's just, this is how we are, we're more direct. Why is that, right? And all those things come into play. So once you do is say, okay, I can give him a blight on how direct he's coming, and then I could understand. But if he's just being a real jerk, then you got to set him straight a little. But you know how to, in a way that you can talk to him on his level, so you go, oh, he gets me. And then it's just where you get to a point of respect. So once you get to a point of respect, then everybody starts to work together toward the common goal, right? And that is something that is very key when engaging in this world, whether it's in business or whatever. Once you're understanding dynamics, you have to deal with, even as a person of Caribbean heritage, the certain sensitivity you have to have, whether you're from Barbados or whether you're from Jamaica or or Trinidad, everybody might think, oh, they're all the same. No, there's so much sensitivity you have to understand. Then when dealing with people from the continent, you got to know how an East African handles from a West African. You got to understand how West Africans interact because they're from Nigeria or Ghana, and they're very different.
There's so much to know, Ryan. You said there's so much to know
so
about
much to
culture,
understand, so much to unpack. But you got to treat it from even though sometimes you be like, oh my God, this is frustrating. But then if you listen, you're like, okay, but then how do you set it up so that they could all come together to have a common goal, to want to be like, yo, I'll follow you. If you got to lead, how can I get you to back me? How can you know what I mean?
You've seen so many different angles that now you have you can navigate people at all different shapes and sizes very quickly, and utilize your cultural knowledge
and understanding
to be able to better facilitate relationships with people, which ultimately is essential in anything a person does, because at the end of the day, it's always the people who are the ones who say this and reach out to this and connecting and this,
and they might want to follow you or open up the door,
or you get locked, or you open up a door, but also if you get locked in a freezer, who's gonna come and open the door? Not the guy who owns the building. He's on vacation. Right, no, you need to know who has the key to the door.
Always there and this is why relationships are so important. But this is where it helps, having that cultural understanding, talking to people, taking time out to read the history, and then understanding certain things, having a fascination on so many levels.
You brought up Fort Worth, Texas, also, when you were saying about Texas. How long did you live in Texas for?
I was there for about 2-3 years, because I was in Dallas, Fort Worth, and then I was in Houston, and then I moved and I lived in Alberta. So living out west for a while before I came back to Ontario. And it's funny. It's like one of the greatest things about that was not realizing, because I started coming back to Canada, because I came back during the Great Recession, when things were a little rough, right?
Yes.
So I thought even coming back to Ontario was like the greatest failure, because I thought I was going to live in the state. And then I thought I was going to live in Alberta, but I didn't think I was going to come back to Ontario, most of all Brampton. But it is the greatest irony that coming back, I didn't see it at the time when I came back in 2010. But coming back to Brampton was the best thing that ever happened to me, because in 2013, my mentor, when I came back, I met someone in the gym. We became friends, and we started a news platform, the Habari Network, which then my business card that I sent you. Yeah. So we would have we would start that in a gym, and it's the life journeys along the way. He's from Uganda, so I'd work with him, and we would talk about things that are going on in Africa and everything. It would open up my world to then seeing more news and focusing in on engaging with Barbadian politics and stuff, because I got more interested, because I would start going to events that were centered around Barbados, and that was very helpful. And then in 2013, my mentor invited me down to Washington, D.C., and it opened up my world to seeing Black luminaries who are doing so well in business. And these are some of the people that I watched on TV, and just to see them in real life, I was like,
a mentor has changed your life. Why? What is a mentor?
Well, for me, my mentor, it was funny, because my mentor, may rest in peace, his name is Ron Parker. He passed away in 2025. But it was funny how we met. He was been the guide, and he taught me, because when we met in 2006, it was the craziest thing. Like, when I got into business school, I see a packet, you get the welcome package and everything. Yeah. And I see this brother, a fellow Black man who's on the international board of visitors for the school. And he's a VP of HR for Pepsi. And, wow. And I was like,
wait a second. His name again? Sorry, I think I've heard
Ron Parker.
Was the Pepsi. Yeah.
Yeah. He's now passed, but he was
the champion of connection, Ronald C. Parker.
Yeah.
From TCU magazine. With the purple suit and the cup, the champion of connection.
That's him. So the funny part about that is that I was like, yo, I got to be mentored by this guy. And I remember I was like, when I was reading this, I said, God, I hope I have a friend that's like a Jonathan that, we could be like locked in arm in arm to really do great things. Funny enough, when I landed, when I went we were doing our mixer, like on the second day that I arrived at in Fort Worth, I go in and I see a brother there sitting, at the restaurant. It was called the Blue Mesa, and he's sitting there, and he and I are the only two brothers in our class. We're like looking around. I go, yo, you with TCU? He goes, for Neely School of Business, the MBA mixer? He goes, yeah. I go, me too. But I go, thank God. And we laughed. I go, what's your name? Jonathan. I was like, what? And we started, and we became best friends from that day, and we helped each other graduate. We went through the war. What was funny, it did not dawn on me when I saw his name and everything. It was only by the second or third week that I realized that the guy who was Jonathan, which I prayed for as a friend, that we would be able to luck to really get through business school, that was his father. And so it was like, yo. So then I got to meet him too, and he opened up my world and introduced me to great people. So when the certain people that I grew up watching, like reading about, like there's a magazine called Black Enterprise Magazine. I grew up reading that magazine as a kid, right? Because their family was very conscious. And so I read that as a kid, and then I got to meet the founder. And what was cool, just to found out by his last name, only later on I realized he was also of Barbadian heritage himself. The same guy, Earl Grey, may he rest in peace. I got to meet him and his wife and everything else, and it was crazy. So in 2013, after I come back to Canada, I connect with him because we featured his father after his father left Pepsi and moved on to be CEO of the Executive Leadership Council. My news platform, we had featured an article from something he wrote, and I sent it to him and said, yo, we were writing about your father. And his father was so pleased. He was like, yo, Ryan, we got to talk. And then after that, he was like, yo, come to DC. So then I got to go to DC, and I went in 2013, 2014 to the Gala so that I could connect, met some great people, luminaries that I would watch on TV. I'm meeting these people in real life. Even I still remember my greatest joy was meeting Brandy. Brandy, she was hilarious. She could, now that girl can sing in real life.
You met all the celebrities.
Well, not all, but her was great. She came to that event, and it was crazy because this girl can sing for real. But you know what was nice? Then after I met her when I was walking to another place, I was just walking, and I ran into her, and I was like, Brandy, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've been a big fan. And I even joked with her because one of my former roommates, but still one of my best friends from both high school and uni when I was at Western. When we were in class together in chemistry in high school, I used to torture this guy because I'd be always singing, I wanna be danced, right? I'd be bumping that. So I told her about that, and she was like, okay. And, when I told my friend, he was laughing because he was like, bro, I hated when he used to do that. But it was a great joy because I love Brandy, right? And I still do. Like, she could sing. So that was cool, just to meet her and talk to her. And she was so down to earth. And it was just great. And then in 2017, I came again. And it was funny because he invited me down because he said, I want you to be connected, because he wanted to do a lot to help bridge the gap between the African-American community and the continent of Africa and the diaspora, because that was one of his greatest missions that he was really trying to push for, right? And so for me, I've always been pushing that too, because that was so important as well for me.
Why you? Not every. In my case, not every Jewish person cares so much about Judaism, a religion, or Israel, a country. Some do, some don't. Some people are pro, some people are not. You are big on your heritage, your roots. Why?
Because you know what? Bringing it back to what you were talking about, some do, some don't. Now you got to get to the why some do and why some don't, right? Sometimes it depends on how you were brought up and how you were raised. And do you identify, or do you feel proud of the roots, or do you look at it from a place of shame, right? Fortunately for me, when I grew up, my family, our family's pretty well known, especially among Black families. in Barbados, right? But the thing is, I was born as the outsider and the black sheep because I was born out of wedlock. So I was seen as literally the black sheep of the family, the outsider, even amongst my cousins and stuff. So I guess that's why I could also relate to David, and it doesn't hurt that my middle name, Ryan Andre David, so I identified with the warrior, the outsider, and the same journey.
Wait, you just said something very personal and private.
Yeah.
But this is perhaps could be perceived as like a public conversation that could be online forever. You're gonna say personal things that reveal
No, I'm
your
just being
vulnerability.
honest, so that because you see, you never know, because I'm saying what other people could be saying, but it's saying it out loud.
You're not afraid to admit anything.
No, you know what? It's not about just saying hot pork, but it's just saying something from an honest place, so that people could honestly see. Because sometimes, if you try to put up too button up, then honestly, I always question when a person is too shiny. I always go, yo, there's something greasy about you, man. You're too greasy. I don't trust you. I'm not saying pour out all your intimate life, and then after that, they're like, yeah, bro, chill. But a lot of people have to understand, and I think this is important for one reason. Right now, the current political climate that we're going through, there's this perception of how people are or how people are, that they will judge you without understanding. Remember what I said? We don't. So from that, I said I knew I was an outsider. But one of the most powerful things is that grandmother didn't see me as an outsider, and then I realized the power of even within our own community, we had adoptability. My mom would tell me about who my cousins were. And a lot of my cousins did great things. If you've ever been to Barbados, you fly into the airport. My cousin was the one who did all the work on the Brantley Adams Airport, which you fly in. So I have a connection to Barbados. Like my grandmother told me about my dad's side of the family, which I did not know. That was so powerful that it changed the way how I see myself, even as the outsider. And that's where you once again the gift, and it was like. Because when like I always say, I bleed blue and gold above all else. I love Barbados. I will always do it. Yeah, Barbados. But my dad's from St. Kitts. I remember it wasn't my dad who told me about my cousin. It was my grandmother when, the day I was leaving to come back to Canada, because she goes, the Prime Minister of Barbados died. And I go, oh, wow. And she goes, then your cousin was there. And I was like, who's my cousin? And she goes, Kennedy Simmons, and he's the first prime minister of the country, which is like the father of independence for that country. And it was crazy because for me, I used to, how can I be like an ambassador or something, an ambassador's kid? That would be so great. And then just to find that out, I was like blown away. You have cousins that you find out you have cousins that are doctors doing great things, like even in America and stuff. So from that, I can see myself and people that I'm related to. So even if I'm here in Canada where I don't always see myself reflected, I at least know I've got a connection where we are not out. It's normalized. Like I remember one of my aunt's husband, we were still cool with him. And he always had a liking to me. And he goes, Ryan, one time he looked at me, he goes, Ryan, if you become a doctor, it's nothing special. And it wasn't because he was trying to down me. It's because he's like, you have so many people that are doctors in your family. It ain't going, it's just going to be, you're just going to be one of many. And, when you think about it, that is a good thing to do. You don't have to always be the first, but just for it to be so normal, that is like you go outside and it's the sun comes out, and it's like, yeah. And so you walk different, you move different. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I know. I'm taking this in. I'm. This is so interesting. I'm taking all this in. I'm taking this in. Interesting.
Yeah.
Barbados. In Barbados, if I may ask, a different kind of question. People are just talking to each other there's a lot of natural communication at a cultural level because of. That is different than us both living in Canada in cities. Well,
Barbados, Barbados is a dichotomy of many things, right? Like sometimes I jokingly say to be a Bajan, like, we joking, we're like to my Chinese roommate, my best friend, the running joke I used to say is, I go, yo, man, China's the Barbados of Asia. And I go, and Barbados is the China of the Caribbean because it's so competitive, right? And the higher your family, it could be competitive and everything else. But the thing is, at the same time, there's an emphasis on manners and whatnot, no matter what. But you see, you got to understand the history of the country, right? And then once again, it goes back. Once you study your history,
What is the history? What is the history of Barbados?
Well, when you think about it, one of the third oldest parliaments in the world, even before it gained independence, especially in the Western Hemisphere. It was the gate when you had, even from the slave trade, unfortunately, used to stop in Barbados before. It was a hub and spoke before you used to go elsewhere. We've had our reach, even like whether you go all the way up to Nova Scotia, right into especially into the Carolinas. The influence of the Caribbean, if you look, you see that some of the people, the slaves, they went into, like the South Carolina and everything. If you look at the Caribbean on the whole, the reason, the reason why even the wealth of Harvard and all those Ivy Leagues, they're similar to how a lot of that wealth was built on the planter class that's been from the Caribbean. They went there instead of trying to go all the way to Oxford or Glasgow, even though you had a lot of those people. So we've been there, and even Barbados is, considered one of the big four, the four founding, members of CARICOM. Yeah. Even though we're the smallest of all the big four, we're the smallest one. But, right. Impact is so outsized. But the thing is, when most people don't realize, even the influence of how our relationship even to the Irish, because of the even our accent, the Bajan accent is due to the engagement of the Irish and the Scottish, meaning with the West African, when they came as indentured servants into the Caribbean, and they were the overseers. So where are you going to learn how to speak English from? It's going to be, so that engagement.
No, this is so much to take in.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on all the different social? When you're Canadian,
yeah,
but you lived in America during some very complicated social cultural things. What are your thoughts on the? What are your feelings and thoughts of such a movement as Black Lives Matter? What are your feelings?
No, well, and sometimes I think it's interesting, and I'm glad you asked, because sometimes some people, when they, the way when people come, when they look at it from Black Lives Matter, they hear Black Lives Matter. You see, you got to remember, in history, you remember when you used to see whites only, right?
Yes.
In history, you hear whites only, no Jews, Irish, blacks, or dogs.
No
So
Jews allowed. No Jews allowed, or dogs allowed.
Or Irish or blacks. So So when people, you see, the problem is that when most people hear black, it's because they assume it means black only. Right? Because whenever you said something is for white folks, you do not say, they would say whites only. Or when you say something is mainstream, it automatically means white because the world is painted. Like if you study history, right? If you go,
yes.
When you were going to school and you were studying Canadian history, it was Canadian white people history. The indigenous were not mentioned. Black people were never mentioned.
The religion, Jewish was not mentioned.
Nope. And
it's the plight of all the minorities.
Right.
All the minorities are getting their butt kicked.
Everybody, not even the Italians were mentioned, bro. It was like nobody was mentioned except white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So therefore, they're always going to judge from that. You remember what I talked about, the zero-sum game?
Yes.
So when they hear Black Lives Matter, it's kind of like when we say Black Power, right? It wasn't Black Power like Black only power or Black power over everyone else.
No.
It's just like Black empowerment so that we could have the ability to contribute to be part of the society as well. So
you're saying it's all misinterpreted as being it's
so
all misinterpreted.
Black Lives Matter, we're saying Black Lives Matter just to say Black Lives Matter too, So the two is quite.
You shouldn't be forgetting about
exactly. So it's not
about. It's not about justice.
He didn't say only Black Lives Matter. Right? He didn't say only BLM. We just said BLM just to say, look, we matter too.
we're not
right?
getting enough. There
Yeah,
isn't
yeah,
enough.
we're not, and we're saying, look, we matter too. Like, yo, come on now, and it's in a certain context, right? And the reason why,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and the greatest example of that is when even up here in Canada, the girl, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter Canada, she said, as I do this fight, I realize that I'm not just fighting for Black folk, but I'm fighting for the marginalized, the LGBTQ, those who do not have a voice. Otherwise, I'd be just a greater oppressor, right? There's a reason why when Martin Luther King was fighting, he then fought for the poor as well. There's a reason why even Fred Hampton with the Black Panther Party, he got the FBI went blacks murked him. Why? Because of the fact that they did not, because he was actually rallying the Latinos, he was rallying the white community and everything to say, hey, look, we're about equality for all. And lest we forget, even the NAACP, was it not like Jack, I believe it was Jack Greenberg who was it, who was one of the first presidents of the NAACP, who was Jewish. So the Jewish and the Black community has always been tied in. And as I always joke, because even when I had a few crushes, a few Jewish girls when I was at Western too. My boy will
Mazel tov.
Yeah. No, he used to joke and say, hey, Ryan, so when they were like, shut up, man. But
you slipped that in. You slipped that in quickly. You slipped it in.
But the running joke was, though, is that one of the things you've got to remember, right? I used to joke even with them. I said, hey, man, I read the Bible, too, and I know that, when Joseph was giving the priest the bond, like, come on now, if you understand history, you understand the Jewish experience of the Black, even from the continent. We've rocking. I mean, like, Mr. Jew, like, come on, right?
Should there be more dialogues between
there has to be
the
more
Jewish
dialogue.
community?
Without dialogue, we will always be at loggerheads or we'll view each other like this, or it will be a place of, we've helped you. You should be so grateful to us. And then we'll feel like we're being exploited because we're not given the chance. But yet, if you open up an honest engagement, then we could honestly learn and we could honestly engage. We could honestly help one another. But then also, hey, can you teach me how you did that? Because I found that, like, when you talk to many here, brother, and whatnot, he said, yeah, it was when I was getting up in the game, I walked and I talked to a guy and he was like, they're ready to teach you, and they're ready to show you. And you're like, what? And they're like, oh, yeah. And they open it up. So then you could start doing it for your own because you understand how when the doors were closed, you had no choice but to do for yourself, right? But I think, which is very interesting, and it goes back because sometimes I think this is where the divide was even between our communities as Black and Jewish, is that, once again, you remember after the civil rights, it was like, we've helped now. But the thing is, I think where the divide happened like this, rather than us moving like this, is that it felt that our story was not we were not able to tell our story. It was only seen as through how the Jews help Black folk, but it wasn't through a...
The Jews are not letting the other cultures speak enough, and you have so much, but there's so much that needs to be said. Where is the forum with which to say it?
Right, and so sometimes it's the little things like just the honest conversations that we're having, because it's not always going to be in the group because everybody's going to have their hang-ups or feel defensive, but it's just the honest conversation that just leaks out where people are like, yo, you know what, that's true. Because if you understand that, I mean, like, when you hear about in the States, they're talking about redlining, right?
Yes,
you know what? Crazy is the redlining. What most people don't realize, the guy who created redlining, he even did that to prevent Blacks and Jews. That's why he did the redlining.
It's all tied together.
And he was Jewish himself. And I was like,
he was Jewish himself. He wanted there to be a Jewish community.
Hey, but you know what? But he was fucking up the Jews too. He didn't even want them. He was like, only white people. And I was like, huh?
Wait a second. I'm getting an education here. Oh man, why did I spend all those years in computer training in university?
But that's the thing, right? But the thing is, at the same time, I've seen it happen in the Black community. Something, the thing of the mind and the boggle, right? Now we have like Clarence Thomas who's like doing what he's doing, and we're like, bro, you do know that you're kind of, but then it goes back to, what about once you go back and did you bother to understand the history of the person? Because if you study that, you remember when we were talking about, when you were mentioning about Jews who feel the connection to Israel and some who don't. Once you go back to the history of Clarence Thomas, it's almost like he didn't like himself because how he grew up. And so it's always that friction because he's a man that's trying to define who he is as himself. And that situation leads to how you could be doing things that even work against your own. And this is why it's so important to have that understanding. Because if you don't, even though I'll still be like I said, the mind will be boggled, the engagement of how and why people do the things they do, it's easy to paint them, right? But I always said, for me, it's easy to go, oh, that person is, but sometimes it's better to go, why is he? Why is he doing this? Why is it, rather than he's doing this, therefore he is this way? Because if you ask, why is he? Then you have an understanding, but it's not to excuse, but it is to understand. Because still at the same point of, of dealing with the situation, you got to remember after understanding, then you go, so did anyone try to help him to move to this level, or did they? Because, and those are very important questions to ask. Now, if he had those opportunities, would he have chosen a different path? Now, if
you are a big believer in judging every person favorably, no matter what.
I take it as they are, right? Like, I take them as they are, but I still understand, right?
Where did you learn that? Where did you learn this magical trait of that you are?
Because I'm an acquired taste myself. That's how I learned, because I always go, hey, if someone, I'm like, hey, man, if you knew me back when I was in elementary school and high school, you might not have liked me. I was a jerk. I was a douchebag. Like, but at the same time, nobody bothered to ask why. And then it was only understanding myself and then choosing to go this way, because I had the guidance still. I had good friends along the way that guided me and saw me for where I could be, and they respected me as me. So that made it that was like different. And it's funny because then when you see people that you run into, they're like, they're like, yo, you grew. And I was like, I grew, but it's just, and I could say, yo, thank you, man. You had a hand in that. Like, kind people along the way, people who showed me, it wasn't loud, it wasn't the browbeating, it was just the guidance. And then they modeled the behavior that you could adapt, that you were there too. And if you have a code that you live by, you could latch on and develop and grow as a person. So then, and as I got older, one of the things I could appreciate of that is that I don't have to, like nowadays, I'm 48 years old, and I look at the world differently. But I noticed that some people, they just grow old. They never grew up, right? So just usually most old folks, all we got is sometimes as a older man. You realize that you just got a lot of older males cosplaying the men that they were trying to be when they were 18 of what they thought a man should be.
Yes.
And so sometimes, as I tell people, sometimes it was a good thing that I took time in growing up and doing the things, going through the mistakes, because it's not been a better road. It is difficult. Life is difficult. But then once you understand that things change and you just constantly evolve, you get a greater perspective of things.
You are talking to me as if I am a person who has known you for so long. You are not putting a wall up. But
no,
but why should we be tearing down the walls? And Brampton, Brampton, you live in Brampton. The mayor's Brampton Business Ambassadors panel.
Yeah.
But that's people of completely different cultures and backgrounds. But in another country, the people from this group and that group can't get along. But how can they get along in Brampton?
Well, it's not that they necessarily always get along either. But the thing is, once again, it's just the nuances. And I'll give you the best example. When I was in Texas, apparently I needed to show that I was not afraid of a challenge. And I was like, I remember the lady in my business school telling me that, and I was like, you realize I'm a black man of Caribbean heritage from Canada. We're going to school in Texas where I have no family, in a state where I have no family connection. And you're asking about not afraid to go for a challenge. So I went.
The definition is the challenge.
Yeah. Like, but apparently, I was like, oh my gosh. At that point, you're like Americans, right? Because Americans will American, but then once you get to understand them, you're like, God bless them, you still love them either way, right? But so I go to Chile with these guys. I can't speak a lick of Spanish. The only thing I could understand is that I thank God I took Latin in school. So that made it a lot easier to understand certain things. And then just a mental open mind. Even if I can't speak the language, I'll try, but I'll pick up certain things. And sometimes, in translation, you start to realize paying attention to body dynamics and everything else. It's amazing how, you could have a conversation.
Reading people, you're touching on the human engagement, which is non-verbal. When you can't even
the verbal and so that
cues.
it becomes contextual, so that you could have a full-on conversation with people you can't even speak the language.
Non-language
and you
based
understand
communication.
them because it's contextual.
Like a pointing at a menu.
Yes.
Or in like a basic restaurant in a rural area in a third world country.
Exactly.
And you're just like, me eat.
Yeah. So you're like, and so you're engaging, but you're still, and so it's contextual, and so then you pick up certain things. So I remember, we went to Chile. I was in Viña del Mar. We first went to Santiago, and then we were in Viña del Mar and Valparaiso, right? So when I was in Santiago, I was there, and I remember I was at the Hotel Bonaparte. Now, apparently, I left my wallet in the whatchamacallit, because I went to work out, and I left my wallet because I didn't think in my room. I did not think anything of it because you have a walking. But because I used to travel, I always I'm always like, I have a way to mark things so that I know if anything happens, I'm aware. So when I went out, I noticed that money out of my wallet was missing.
There was a thief going around.
I said, I'm missing money, because I had mentally had an inventory and I knew how I set it up so that someone's an American. And I told my professor, and my professor was like, what? So everybody's like, Ryan, God, money was stolen out of my wallet. So somebody goes, well, why did they take all the money? Because they said if they did, they would know that I noticed. So they,
intelligent, the high level of thought that goes into a misdeed. Yes, there's always that.
So they took some so that I wouldn't know. They didn't think I would notice what was missing, right? And the only reason why I could do that, because I always remembered, like, who was it that said it best? It was a quote by General Mobutu when he was in Congo, where he said, if you're going to steal a little at a time. Because if you do too big, everybody will know. But if you take a little at a time, it accumulates, right?
I've heard the exact same quote in a different.
So I said, and that's basically what the thing. So when I went to Hotel Bonaparte, where we were there, and I told the people, right? And they went, same thing. So why would someone only steal? I said, because they figured I would not notice. But I set things up where I noticed. And I said, this is how much it was that I'm missing. Now, what was funny, some of my classmates heard. Now, bear in mind, this is on so many levels, it's meaningful, because there were only 2 Black folks that were on this trip, me and this other girl. And I, like I said, I didn't try to fit it. I just do what I got to do. And because, living in the Caribbean helped me navigate, around. That there was a time, by the point, I was walking around certain parts of Santiago, in the area by myself, and I knew it back to front. When I was in Viña del Mar, I would just go quietly walking like how I would do in Barbados, and then I had a run as a place, so I was comfortable. And people weren't shocked because they're like, you can't speak Spanish, but I know my way around because I learned how to navigate. I was even getting food ordering and stuff, and then if I want to, I dip and blend in. So when we went to Viña del Mar, I was at the thing. I had a great time. I come back from, Hotel Bonaparte. They're like, sir, we have some good news for you. What is it? We found the money and we noted, based on what I told them, we looked at the cameras and it was one of the cleaners went into the room and she took them. And then they were like, we have your money and we are so sorry and we hope you will not judge us. I said, look, I'm not going to judge you for that because, look, you showed kindness, you showed understanding, but let's be real. If I was in Toronto, I might not have seen this money at all, yet you had my money. And you came back and they go, how much was it? Now, they didn't even keep one. So I could have said, oh, yeah, it was this, and this, because they had a whole lot of money there of missing dollars.
How much are you really talking about? You're not talking about 10 Canadian dollars.
No, it was the equivalent of about $60 to $100. But even then, it's still a lot when you're traveling and you didn't have much to begin with.
Oh, so that's like a month's salary, maybe in some areas in Chile, of course.
So
the money. I heard this a few times. Someone's like, "Oh, they robbed me for $60," and then another guy's like, "That $60 is like 11 pairs of shoes
or
to that
something,
someone's."
Right?
That $60 was a good deed.
Right, and so when I
stealing.
told them that, I just took what was missing and I just said no, this, and I took it exactly in the way that I had it, this and this, and that
you
was
did
it.
not pursue any charge. You are not the guy when someone takes from you, you go run to the police.
Well, it depends on the situation. I give you a chance, but if you decide you're going to be a dick about it, then we go into war. And then when I go to war with people, it ain't pretty. I'm like Genghis Khan. I'll say, I bring diplomacy first. I'm here to take over, but you keep running what we do. Be good, be cool, and just pay your tribute, and we nice. But if you go, wow, screw you, and I'm like, yo, I didn't come like that. Or if I'm going to do business, let's do business. But if you come rude, then all of a sudden I'm like, all right, you know what? Tell you the truth, we're going to war.
You are carrying and you are expressing tremendous strength. Is an important way to express oneself because that is necessary for honor.
Right, and so you just do in diplomacy. But if you go to war, then I'll go to war and I'll fight just as dirty because I'm about, I say you have to know when to be ninja and when to be samurai. So I'm not afraid to go dirty. I'm not afraid to go.
What's the difference between ninja and samurai? These are some complicated
Well, the best
terms.
way to describe it in a short term is that the ninja will stab you in your back. The samurai will stab you in the front because it's a great dishonor. And
you're talking about honorable.
Yeah, the honorable, because the shinobi were like the spies. They were the one that did the dirty work. They were the one that would blend into society, gather the intelligence, and they do the dirty work, right? The samurai were like the few, like they were the equivalent of the knights in feudal Japan, right?
Yes.
So so there's a certain code they have to live by, but the shinobi had a code too, and a hierarchy and everything just as much. But it was that they would do the dirty work that the samurai could not be seen as doing.
You are implementing the philosophy of what do you call it? Bushido.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a code of ethics that you live by. So it's the same way. But for me, I'm like, you have to know when to be one, or like you need to know when to be the eagle and when to be the vulture. Each one plays its role, right? And so why that story though about Viña del Mar and Valparaiso and was so important is because I then would find out from my other fellow students that some of their money got missing, and everybody, you know what the people said?
Yes.
Sorry, can't help you. Disculpe, we can't help you. They were like, sorry, we